Hello and welcome. Before we begin, take a deep breath. Let your shoulders soften. Let your thoughts settle. This is a quiet place, a soft space for curiosity and calm. If you're new here, feel free to like, subscribe, and gently ring the little bell so we can meet again, each night with a new story. Tonight, we'll explore something invisible, but essential. Something we use every day, but rarely notice. Tonight, we'll talk about language, where it came from, why it matters, and how it made us who we are. So close your eyes and let's begin. Language is something we carry so lightly that we often forget how powerful it is. We speak without thinking. We listen without effort. We type messages, tell stories, sing songs, rarely stopping to ask, where did all this begin? And yet, language is one of the most astonishing things human beings have ever created, because it didn't come from stone or fire, but from the air between us. It's the tool we use to share our thoughts, to ask for help, to tell someone we love them, or to describe the taste of tea on a rainy afternoon. No other species has anything like it. Yes, animals communicate, birds sing, bees dance, wolves howl. But language is different. It's layered, abstract, creative. It can describe not only what is, but what was, what might be, and what can never be. It's how we pass on memory from one generation to the next. It's how we build culture, law, religion, and science. Without language, we would still be watching the stars without giving them names. We would still be gathering around fire without ever saying this is home. But where did it come from? How did we go from silence to sound? From simple cries to poetry? That's the mystery we'll explore tonight. Scientists believe that language evolved gradually, not in a single spark, but in small, slow steps over hundreds of thousands of years. At first, perhaps, it was just a gesture, a pointed finger, a look that meant follow. Then came sounds, grunts of warning, calls of joy, tones of comfort. Over time, these sounds became patterns. Patterns became words, and words became a world. Because language isn't just how we talk, it's how we think. It shapes what we remember, what we notice, what we feel is even possible. When we speak, we're not just making noise, we're making meaning. And every word you've ever said, even the softest, carries within it the history of human imagination. So tonight, we'll walk together through that history. From the first breath of sound to the languages we whisper now in 1,000 dialects, on every corner of Earth. Let's begin this journey with a quiet curiosity, because the story of language is the story of us. Before we spoke, before we named the stars or shaped words from air, we still needed one another. Even without language, living things have always found ways to connect. Let's step further back into the ancient world to see how nature spoke before words were ever born. Long before Homo sapiens, before even the first humans, communication was already woven into the fabric of life. From the smallest insect to the tallest tree, living beings send messages. A bird sings not just for beauty, but to claim a home, to call a mate, to say, "I am here." A bee dances in spirals and angles, showing her sisters where the flowers bloom. A wolf lifts its tail, a cat arches its back, a deer freezes in stillness, each movement a message. This is nonverbal communication. It is ancient, universal, and incredibly effective. Among mammals, these signals become more complex, especially in primates, our evolutionary cousins. Chimpanzees grunt, shriek, pant, hoot, and drum on trees. They also gesture, offering a hand, slapping the ground, nudging, hugging, even pointing. They use their faces to show fear, anger, curiosity. And when young chimpanzees play, they laugh, a sound surprisingly familiar. These forms of communication are powerful, but limited. They work in the moment, in close proximity. They express emotion, but not abstraction. They warn, greet, comfort, attract, but they do not tell stories or ask questions. They cannot say, "Let's meet tomorrow," or "What if the rain doesn't come?" or "Remember the time we saw the eagle?" That kind of expression requires something more. It requires symbols, where a sound or gesture stands for something else. It requires memory and shared understanding. It requires the seeds of what we now call language. But these early systems of calls and gestures were not meaningless. They were the soil from which language would one day grow. They trained the brain to read patterns, to form expectations, to respond not just with instinct, but with thought. And as brains grew larger and social lives more complex, communication needed to do more. More than just, "I'm scared." More than, "Food is here." It needed to say, "This is mine. This is yours. This is sacred. This is home." Before humans could speak, we had to need to speak. And that need was born in the wild, among trees, tribes, and time. So when we finally formed the first true words, we were not inventing communication. We were expanding it from gesture to grammar, from impulse to intention, from silence to song. Gestures carried meaning. Faces spoke without sound. Eyes, hands, bodies, they told stories in silence. But then something changed. The breath grew louder, the chest vibrated, and the mouth began to shape sound. Before we had words, we had breath. It is the beginning of every voice. A quiet force moving from deep within, rising through the throat and dancing on the air. The human voice begins with the lungs, filling with air, pressing gently upward. Then the vocal cords, or vocal folds, begin to vibrate. These cords are small, delicate folds of tissue inside the larynx, the voice box, and from them comes sound. At first, these sounds were simple: cries of pain, shouts of warning, coos of affection. They were born from emotion, not thought. They didn't mean lion or food. They meant danger or joy in the most direct and urgent way. In this sense, language began not in logic, but in feeling. Babies today still echo this pattern. They cry, laugh, babble long before they speak. Emotion is our first language, and for most of human history, it may have been our only one. But soon, something deeper began to stir. As our ancestors listened to the world around them, the wind in the trees, the calls of animals, the sound of feet on dry leaves, they began to imitate. Perhaps a sound that mimicked a bird meant, "Look up." A growl-like murmur meant, "Stay close." A huff, a pop, a hum, each one carrying its own rhythm, its own idea. Imitation is a powerful bridge between experience and meaning. It allows us to point with sound, to recreate the world with the breath itself. And so, over time, these early noises became intentional. They were no longer just instinctive cries. They were tools, used again and again in the same way for the same reason. This is the foundation of proto-language. Not full grammar, not true vocabulary, but a meaningful system of sounds. Sounds began to link to memory, to events, to shared experience. And with every repetition, these sounds became more familiar, more stable, more trusted. A grunt no longer meant only frustration. It could mean, "Come here." A sharp click could mean food. A soft sigh might mean safe. Emotion was still there. But now, sound was being shaped not just by feeling, but by intention. And that intention was the spark of something new. something that would grow from whisper to word, from call to conversation, from breath to language. Breath gave us sound. Emotion gave it meaning. But before our voices took full shape, our bodies were already speaking. With every glance, every motion, every hand extended or held back. Long before the first true words, communication was deeply physical. A raised eyebrow, a turned head, a reaching hand, a shrug. These are not random movements. They are signals, instinctive, immediate, and older than any language we know. Even today, 93% of human communication is estimated to be nonverbal. And this tells us something profound. Our bodies speak even when our mouths stay still. Among our earliest ancestors, millions of years ago, these gestures were a lifeline. When sound might attract predators, a quick hand signal could guide a group or warn of danger. A pointed finger could say, "Look." A hand held up could mean, "Stop." A shared glance could carry a feeling of trust or fear. Chimpanzees, bonobos, and gorillas, our closest living relatives, use dozens of distinct gestures to communicate. They reach, pull, offer, tap, and even hold hands. Their gestures aren't random. They're intentional. They come with clear meaning and often a desire for response. This shows us that gesture-based communication was likely a major part of how early humans interacted. It was flexible, visual, and didn't require the vocal control that would come much later. In fact, some scientists believe that language began in the hands, not the mouth. This idea is known as the gesture-first hypothesis. It suggests that human language may have begun as a system of physical signs and movements. Hands could act out shapes, mimic actions, point to things that weren't nearby. Gestures allowed early humans to speak of what was not present, a crucial step toward symbolic thought. They could pantomime a hunt, imitate the shape of a predator, or signal food over the hill. This ability to represent the absent was a turning point, a bridge between simple reaction and complex communication. And while gesture was powerful, it had limits. It required visibility. It couldn't be used in the dark, or when hands were busy, or from too far away. That's where sound began to take over, filling in the gaps, layering on top of motion, until the two worked together. Even now, we gesture when we speak. We nod. We wave. We move our hands to shape our thoughts. Our bodies never stopped talking. They simply welcomed the voice to speak with them. So in the long path toward language, gesture was not replaced. It was a bridge, a graceful, moving connection between silence and sound, between thought and expression, between what we felt and what we finally found a way to say. Our hands could point. Our faces could show. Our breath could shape sound. But something was still missing. A thread to tie sound to meaning. Then, slowly, almost invisibly, that thread appeared. Imagine early humans moving through grasslands or forests hundreds of thousands of years ago. They grunt, gesture, call, whistle, not with language, but with instinct. Yet one day, a particular sound escapes someone's mouth in the presence of a specific object, a stone, a river, a fruit, and that sound is repeated once, then again, and again, in the same context. Others begin to associate the sound with the thing it refers to. Suddenly, the sound represents the object. It becomes a kind of symbol, not because the sound looks like the object or feels like it, but because the group agrees. This sound means that thing. This is the birth of meaning, not instinct, not reflex, but symbol. The moment a sound stands for something else, a place, a tool, a feeling, language begins. This leap required a new kind of thinking, symbolic thought. It's the ability to hold one thing in mind as representing another. A sound for a tree, a gesture for danger, a word for I. We see early traces of this in cave paintings and carved figurines from over 40,000 years ago. But the thinking itself likely arose far earlier, perhaps as early as 200,000 years ago, or more. This kind of thinking is rare in the animal world. Some primates and birds can associate symbols with objects, but humans went further. We not only created symbols, we used them to build worlds. Think of the difference between a growl that means back off and a word that means lion. The word can be spoken even when the lion is gone. It can be combined with other words. Lion near water. No lion today. I dreamed of a lion. This is the power of symbolic language. It allowed us to talk about the past, the future, the imagined, the invisible. And this change didn't just affect speech. It transformed thought. Because once we could use a symbol to refer to something else, we could begin to think about things not present, to plan, to remember, to wonder. A grunt became a name, and a name became a tool for memory, teaching, identity, and meaning itself. The shift was slow, generation by generation. Each community passing on more sounds, refining them, agreeing on what they meant. From breath to sound, from sound to sign, from sign to language. A sound became a name became a tool. But something even greater was happening, not in the mouth, but in the mind. Because language didn't just change how we communicated, it changed who we could become together. Humans are not the fastest, not the strongest, not the most durable creatures on Earth, but we are perhaps the most connected. And that connection, that ability to live in groups, to cooperate, to trust, to share, has been the foundation of human survival for millions of years. At the center of that connection is the brain. Over time, the human brain evolved to become not just larger, but more social. Scientists call it the social brain hypothesis, the idea that much of our brain's growth was driven by the demands of living in groups. To survive in a community, an individual had to understand status, relationships, intentions, emotions, not just their own, but everyone else's. Language became the perfect tool to manage this complexity. It allowed early humans to coordinate a hunt, warn about danger, teach their young, soothe the wounded, plan migrations, settle disputes, remember the past, dream of the future. But it also allowed them to do something even more human: gossip. Yes, gossip. Talking about who did what, who can be trusted, who broke the rules. It may sound trivial, but gossip served a deep evolutionary function. It helped maintain group cohesion without constant violence. Instead of fighting for dominance, individuals could use language to influence reputation, build alliances, and encourage cooperation. Gossip was social glue, and through it, humans created something entirely new: culture. Culture is shared memory. It's not in our bones. It's in our words. What we wear, what we fear, what we celebrate, what we forbid. All of it lives in language. Through stories and teachings, rules and rituals, language became the scaffold of society. And as groups grew larger, from small bands of 20 to 50 people, to tribes of hundreds, to villages of thousands, language had to evolve too. It became more structured, more abstract, more layered. Words were no longer just about survival. They became tools of identity, belonging, and power. Who you listened to, who spoke for the group, whose words could change minds. All of this shaped early human life, and continues to shape us now. So when we speak, we don't just speak for ourselves. We carry within us a history of connection, a brain wired to relate, to build, to belong. Language didn't just help us survive the world. It helped us create the world we live in together. We spoke to survive, to hunt, to warn, to comfort. But then, we began to speak of things we could not touch, of moments not yet come, of places not yet seen, of feelings not yet understood. One of the most astonishing gifts of language is its ability to name what is not there. Not just objects we can see, but things we can only feel, imagine, or believe. Think of the word tomorrow. It has no shape, no scent, no sound, but we all know what it means, because language allows us to give names to abstractions: time, hope, fear, memory, justice, love. These are not things we can hold in our hands, but with words, we can share them. This capacity to speak of the invisible is what sets human thought apart. It likely began tens of thousands of years ago, when early humans started linking sounds and gestures to ideas beyond the present moment. Maybe it was a word for rain that will come, or for a friend who is far away. Maybe it was a name for something sacred, a spirit in the fire, a whisper in the dark. From these early symbols came the ability to speak of the past, to remember, and of the future, to plan. But more than that, we began to speak of things that existed only in the mind. We created myths. We told stories of sky gods, of ancestors who walk with us, of creatures beneath the water. We spoke of love, of longing, of dreams that visit us in sleep. And in doing so, we began to build a shared imagination. This was not just language. This was the birth of culture. Because culture is not made of bones or tools. It is made of ideas. Ideas that live in words, travel through breath, and settle in memory. We spoke of the stars and what they might mean. We gave names to seasons, to constellations, to the spirits of the trees. And over time, we began to shape our reality around those invisible things. We created rituals. We marked time with ceremonies. We passed on beliefs not just about what is, but about what should be. This ability to imagine, to symbolize, to agree upon shared meanings. This is what made humans more than just survivors. It made us storytellers, thinkers, believers. And every time we use a word like justice or eternity or peace. We are practicing a kind of quiet magic, the magic of making the unseen real. A name for a tree, a sound for water, a gesture for danger, a word for hope. Language gave us meaning, but meaning alone wasn't enough, because once we had many words, we needed a way to connect them. At first, early language may have been a scattered collection of individual sounds, each one tied to a person, a thing, or an action. But as humans began to think in more complex ways, they needed more than just labels. They needed structure. They needed to say, not just food, but I found food. Not just danger, but he ran from danger. Not just fire, but we made fire yesterday. This shift marks the rise of grammar, the system behind the words. Grammar is not something we often notice, but without it, language would be a loose pile of sounds. Grammar tells us who did what to whom, when, how, and why. Even in the simplest sentences, it gives us the tools to express time, relationship, and logic. Consider the sentence, the child saw the bird. Swap the order, the bird saw the child, and the meaning completely changes. That is grammar in action. We don't know exactly when grammar first appeared, but it likely developed gradually over tens of thousands of years as spoken language became more complex and communities passed down more knowledge. Children began to learn patterns, where to place a word, how to mark a question, how to add meaning with tone or endings, and the brain adapted in response. Modern neuroscience shows that certain areas of the brain are devoted specifically to grammar processing. This suggests that, over time, our brains evolved to handle structure as part of communication. Interestingly, all known human languages, from every culture, no matter how isolated, have grammar. Even though the rules are different, the need for rules is universal. This tells us that grammar is not something we learn by force. It's something the brain expects, something that grows naturally in a social environment. In fact, in the late 1970s, a group of deaf children in Nicaragua created their own sign language without being taught. At first, they used simple signs, but over time, they developed rules: word order, verb tense, agreement. They created grammar from the ground up. This shows us something powerful, that humans are wired for structure, that our minds seek pattern, connection, and clarity. Grammar is not just about correctness, it's about understanding. It allows a thought to travel from one person's mind into another's with precision. It's what makes stories flow. It's what turns feelings into full expression. And even though grammar can seem invisible, it's always there, quietly holding the sentence together, like the frame beneath a house. Words have meaning. Grammar gives them structure, but something else makes them beautiful. Something we don't always notice, but always feel. Not in the mind, but in the body, in the breath, the pause, the rise and fall of sound. Language is music. Every time we speak, we create a kind of melody. Even now, as you listen, you're hearing not just words, but tone, rhythm, and pitch. Language isn't flat. It moves. It dances through the air in waves of sound that our brains and hearts learn to follow. This is true in every culture, in every language on earth. Whether it's English, Zulu, Japanese, or Quechua, all human languages have prosody. Prosody is the musical quality of speech, the rise and fall of pitch, the speed and rhythm of syllables, the tone that tells us how someone feels. And without it, language would be strangely lifeless. Imagine saying, "I'm fine," with a warm voice, and then again with a cold, sharp tone. The words are the same, but the music changes everything. Children learn this music before they learn words. Even newborns can detect rhythm and tone. They respond to soothing voices and sing-song speech, what scientists call infant-directed speech, but what we often call a lullaby. This early sensitivity shows us something ancient, that the roots of language may lie in song. Some researchers believe that long before structured speech, our ancestors used musical vocalizations, like chanting, humming, or tonal calls to express emotion, build connection, and coordinate group activity. This is sometimes called the musical proto-language hypothesis. It suggests that music came first, and that speech evolved from melody, not the other way around. And even today, the line between language and music is blurry. In tonal languages like Mandarin or Yoruba, pitch determines meaning. The same syllable can mean mother, horse, or to scold, depending on how it rises or falls. This tells us that pitch isn't just decoration, it's part of understanding. In poetry, in prayer, in lullabies, language becomes fully musical. It slows down, repeats, rests. It uses silence as part of its message. And music, in return, often uses words. We sing to express what speech alone can't carry. In grief, in joy, in worship, in love. Language and music have always walked together, like breath and heartbeat. So tonight, As you listen to this voice, notice not just the words, but the space between them, the rhythm, the tone, the softness. That is the music of language, and it has always been part of how we understand one another. Even in silence, we still hear its song. We've heard the breath, the rhythm, the structure. We've felt the voice become meaning, music, and memory. But now, let's go deeper, to listen for voices that can no longer be heard, the ones that shaped everything that followed. Today, the world holds over 7,000 spoken languages, each one rich with culture, history, and soul. But thousands of years ago, those languages did not exist. So what came before? Linguists believe that modern languages descend from a much smaller number of language families, groups of related tongues that evolved from common ancestors. The largest of these families is Indo-European, which includes English, Spanish, Russian, Hindi, Persian, and dozens more. These families stretch across continents, connecting people who may never have met, but whose ancestors once spoke the same words. But how do we know? If the earliest languages left no recordings, no writings, how can we even guess what they sounded like? The answer lies in a process called linguistic reconstruction. Linguists compare related modern languages to find shared patterns, similar words, grammatical structures, and sounds. By collecting these clues, linguists can reconstruct parts of what they call proto-languages, like Proto-Indo-European. And as people migrated, settled, and interacted with new environments, languages began to change. They borrowed, split, merged, forgot, invented. Sound shifts occurred. Grammar evolved. New words were born as tools and ideas changed. The result? The incredible diversity we hear today, from tonal clicks in southern Africa to vowel harmonies in Central Asia to rolling R's in Italy. Every modern language is a living fossil, a museum of human history spoken aloud. And yet, beneath all their differences, many languages still share echoes, like distant cousins who remember the same childhood song. So when we speak, we carry not just meaning, but heritage. Our words are made of words that came before them, sometimes thousands of years before. And in every sentence, we repeat what once was said by firelight, beneath stars, in a language now lost to time, but alive in sound. We learned to speak, to name, to point, to feel, to explain, to dream. But at some point, we did something more. We began to tell stories. No one knows the exact moment when the first story was told. There was no curtain, no script, no applause. Just people gathered around firelight after the hunt, after the work, after the day. And someone, perhaps an elder, perhaps a child, began to speak, not just of what is, but of what was and what might be. This was not just speech. This was storytelling. And with it, language became something new. Because a story does not only describe, it connects. It creates sequence. This happened, then that. It builds emotion, hope, fear, surprise. It gives us characters, and with them, identity. Early humans needed more than words for tools and dangers. They needed ways to remember, teach, and belong. Storytelling became the answer. It allowed people to pass on knowledge, explain the unexplainable, bind a group with common beliefs, explore questions without answers. Stories taught children what animals were dangerous, what plants could heal, how the world began. They helped adults make sense of death, of dreams, of stars that moved but never fell. Some stories became myths, timeless, sacred, shared. Others were playful, meant to entertain or pass the hours on a cold and silent night. But all of them served a purpose: to turn experience into meaning. And the human brain responded. Modern neuroscience shows that we process stories differently from simple facts. When we hear a narrative, our brains simulate the events, emotionally, physically, visually. We feel them. We remember them. This is why a good story stays with us longer than a list of data. It's also why children learn through tales, not textbooks. And as language evolved, so did storytelling. With words, people began to exaggerate for emphasis, imagine what never was, craft morals, lessons, humor. In every culture, from indigenous tribes in the Amazon to nomads in Mongolia, storytelling became the heart of tradition. And even today, we still gather around light, not fire, but screens, to hear stories. In books, in songs, in bedtime whispers, in YouTube videos, just like this one. Because stories remind us who we are, where we come from, and what it means to be human. So when you speak, you're not just sharing a thought. You're continuing a tradition older than cities, older than writing, perhaps older than belief itself. The tradition of turning sound into something that lasts. A story. The voice gave us memory. Stories gave us meaning. But something was still missing. Because memories fade. memories change. Voices fall silent. And so, we found a way to make words last. For most of human history, language lived only in the air, spoken, sung, remembered, passed from mouth to ear, generation to generation. But around 5,000 years ago, a quiet revolution began. Somewhere, perhaps in Mesopotamia, perhaps in Egypt or China, people began to write. At first, it wasn't language as we know it today. It was marking. Symbols scratched into clay, pressed into bone, painted on walls. Simple shapes that said, "This is mine. This was traded. This has meaning." The earliest writing systems were used to count, to label, to record grain, animals, debts. But over time, symbols became more than numbers. They became ideas. In Sumer, around 3100 BCE, the system called cuneiform appeared, wedge-shaped marks on soft clay. Each symbol stood for a word, a sound, or a concept. In Egypt, hieroglyphs blossomed, pictures for gods, rivers, animals, dreams. Writing became sacred. It told of kings, seasons, the stars. In China, ancient oracle bones were inscribed to speak with spirits, marking one of the world's oldest continuous traditions of written language. At first, these scripts were logographic. Each symbol stood for a whole word or idea. Later came syllabic writing, and finally, the alphabet, a system where symbols represent sounds. The first known alphabetic system was the Proto-Sinaitic script, dating to around 1800 BCE. It eventually evolved into Phoenician, which gave rise to Greek, Latin, and many modern scripts. This change was profound, because with writing, language became external. It no longer lived only in the mind or mouth. It could be carved in stone, stored in books, sent across time and space. For the first time in history, a thought could outlive its thinker. Writing changed everything. It allowed humans to store history, create laws, compose literature, build empires, study the heavens, question the soul. It allowed religion, science, philosophy, bureaucracy, all to flourish. And yet, the transition from oral to written culture was not immediate or universal. For thousands of years, most people could not read or write. Writing was often a tool of priests, scribes, rulers. But its influence spread slowly, one tablet, one scroll, one letter at a time. And still today, we live in a world shaped by this miracle. That sounds became symbols, and symbols became systems that carry our thoughts across miles, centuries, and minds. Writing gave language a body, a second life, one that does not forget. So as you read or write, remember, you are part of a chain stretching back 5 millennia, a chain built not of iron, but of signs, carved from silence and kept alive by meaning. We wrote to remember. We spoke to connect. But the words we chose were never neutral. They came from who we were, from how we lived, from what we valued. Because language is not just a tool, it is a mirror of culture. Every language is shaped by the people who speak it, by their land, their seasons, their beliefs, their history. Language is not only a way to describe the world, it is a way to see it. The words we use form the patterns of our thought, and the patterns of thought shape how we live. This idea is known as linguistic relativity, the notion that language influences how we perceive reality. It does not mean that speakers of different languages live in different worlds, but it does mean they may notice different things about the same world. For example, in some indigenous Australian languages, people do not use words like left or right. Instead, they speak in terms of cardinal direction: north, south, east, west. Even when pointing to their own hand, they'll say north hand or south hand. This constant awareness of orientation makes speakers unusually skilled at navigation, even in unfamiliar environments. In other cultures, words for time flow in different directions. Some see the past as behind, others as in front. Some arrange time vertically, with the future above and the past below. And then there are untranslatable words, those that exist in one language, but have no direct equivalent in another. Like the Japanese word komorebi, which means sunlight filtering through trees, or the German fernweh, a longing for places you've never been, or the Inuktitut word iktsuarpok, the feeling of waiting for someone and constantly checking if they've arrived. These words carry culture inside them. They describe not just actions, but shared experiences, values, and emotions that define a people. Language holds memory. It holds myth, humor, politeness, resistance. It reflects whether a culture values individualism or community, nature or technology, ritual or innovation. Even silence means different things across cultures. In some, silence is discomfort. In others, it is respect, wisdom, depth. This is why the loss of a language is more than the loss of vocabulary. It is the loss of a worldview. Today, it's estimated that one language disappears every 2 weeks. and with it, a way of seeing the world fades into silence. But every time we speak, especially in our mother tongue, we continue a tradition. We pass on not just words, but the soul of a culture. And when we learn new languages, we don't just gain access to different words. We glimpse other ways of being. Language, then, is not just sound. It is a vessel for memory, for tradition, for identity. To speak is to carry your people with you. To listen is to meet the world through someone else's eyes. Language connects us to others. It tells our stories, carries our memory, and shapes our world. But sometimes, language does something quieter, more private, more invisible. It turns inward and begins to speak to you. Not all language is made of words. Sometimes it's in the space between the words. A pause, a breath, a glance, a silence. These moments carry meaning just as deeply as any sentence. In some cultures, silence is hesitation. In others, it is wisdom. Among the Sami of the Arctic, silence is respect. Among some East African groups, silence is the space where truth can land. In Japan, the phrase harage means speech from the belly, communication through what is felt, not said. In Western traditions, we often fear silence. We rush to fill it, to explain, to conclude. But silence has its own kind of grammar. A pause can mean, I care, I hear you, I'm thinking, I'm feeling. This matters. Poets know this. So do musicians. So do lovers, parents, grievers, and those who pray. The unspoken can be powerful, precise, and profound, because not everything can be named. There are moments too sacred, too painful, too vast for words. When someone cries, we don't explain. We stay. We sit. We breathe with them. That too is language. Language is not only what comes from the mouth, but also what lives in the body, in presence, in stillness. Some of our deepest truths arrive in silence. Some of our clearest understandings happen not when we speak, but when we listen with the whole self. The philosopher Lao Tzu once said, "Silence is a source of great strength." And perhaps, after all the stories, lessons, histories, and songs, what remains is not just the voice, but the space around it, the breath before a word, the hush after a sentence, the quiet in which the soul can finally rest. We've traveled through time, from the first sounds to sacred scripts, from cave echoes to digital voices. But language isn't done. It's still moving, still changing, and now it enters a new chapter, one shaped by machines, networks, and screens. Language has never been still. It evolves with us, with our tools, our cultures, our needs. And today, our world is changing faster than ever. Every second, new words are born online. Old ones fade. Languages mix, collide, blend. The internet has created a global conversation. Through it, languages can travel further than ever before. People across continents can speak, translate, learn in real time, sometimes with the help of a device in their hand. In the past, you had to live in a place to hear its language. Now, a child in Argentina can watch a Korean drama, read an English book, and chat with someone in Turkish, all in one afternoon. This is a kind of miracle. Technology allows endangered languages to be recorded, archived, shared. Linguists and communities can use apps and digital dictionaries to revive tongues once thought forgotten. But this digital age also brings new questions. Will smaller languages survive in a world dominated by global tongues? Will artificial intelligence reshape how we speak, write, think? Already, we see AI tools that can translate instantly, write poetry, even hold conversations. What does that mean for human expression? Some worry that language may lose depth, become simplified, automated, predictable. Others believe it will expand, that AI will help us discover new ways to speak, to write, to understand. Perhaps language will become more visual, with emojis, gestures, images woven into our words. Perhaps we'll develop new forms of communication that we can't even imagine yet, blending voice, thought, and tech. But no matter how language evolves, its heart will remain. Because language is not the tool, it's the connection, the bridge, the thread between minds. Whether written in ink or typed with thumbs, spoken through lips or generated by code, it still carries feeling. And feeling, no matter how it travels, is still human. So the future of language is not just about technology. It's about us, about how we choose to speak, to listen, to remember, to dream. And no matter what shape it takes, language will always be a reflection of our need to understand and be understood. We began in silence. Then came sound. Then story. Then self. Now we return to the quiet, but not the same, because we carry something more. Language is not just what we speak, it is what we are. In this lecture, We followed its journey across hundreds of thousands of years. We listened to how the universe gave us voice, how biology made it possible, how culture gave it shape. We explored the rise of grammar, the music in speech, the birth of writing. We saw how language helped us remember, imagine, belong. We walked through time, through caves, through myths, through alphabets and scrolls, to the glowing screens in our hands today. We reflected on how language shapes culture, thought, and self. We entered the space of inner speech, of shared silence, and the places where words end, but meaning continues. We asked what happens next. As technology grows, as AI learns to speak, as languages rise and fall. And through it all, one truth remained. Language is a gift. A bridge between you and me, between then and now, between what is felt and what can be shared. It is not perfect. It stumbles, changes, forgets. But it also heals, remembers, and connects. And in this quiet moment, as you prepare to drift into sleep, I invite you to feel not just the words, but the space between them, the hush that holds the thought, the breath that holds the soul. Because language is not only about speaking, it is about being heard. Even by yourself, even in the dark. So wherever you are tonight, in any language, in any silence, may you feel a soft thread of understanding, a gentle voice within you, beside you, and beyond you. Thank you for listening. Sleep peacefully and dream in a language all your own.